So we are sharing information about 4 specific charter amendments that are on the King County ballot this November that connects to police accountability. So currently in King County and across the country, there is momentum to reimagine what public safety looks like and feels like for all residents.
However, the King County Charter has several legislative barriers that prevent our elected officials from acting to make meaningful change. There are 4 amendments that are on the ballot in November that remove some of these barriers so that our council can act in the public interest and serve all of their constituents fairly.
Without these amendments, structural change is very difficult, and the public has limited power to advocate for reform and accountability. The King County Charter is basically our constitution. It sets out what the county can do and can't do. So what's in the charter is important. And every 10 years, there's a citizen commission that reviews the charter to make suggested updates. And that's where most of these amendments, but not all, came from. So the first amendment to the charter concerns inquests. Inquests are formal fact-finding processes that look into the cause and circumstances of deaths which occur involving law enforcement. No judgment on liability or fault is made in the process of an inquest. Currently, the law is unclear about which deaths involving law enforcement require an inquest. During the inquest process, county-funded legal representation is provided to law enforcement officers, but not to the families of individuals who have died in their care. A 2018 ordinance does provide such representation, but it's not the same weight as the charter. So this amendment would make it a right under the charter. What it does. This amendment clarifies that an inquest is required when an action, decision, or possible failure to offer appropriate care by a member of a law enforcement agency might have contributed to a person's death. And it specifies that law enforcement agency, for the purpose of this, this section, includes local or state agencies. So local police departments, the Seattle Police, for example, are covered. But it also covers corrections facilities and jails. And then it secondly provides the option of a public defender for the family of the person who has died. It also defines who family is. And why do we need it? Well, to build public trust by ensuring that the families, the public, and law enforcement are served by the inquest process so that they can understand and count on it. Inquests can't repair the damage that's done by a death, but they do give answers about what happened and some information to the family. And they can also identify areas for improvement of the law enforcement agency. The process has had many issues, and as a result, the King County Executive revised procedures for inquests in 2018. But cities opposed these changes, and they filed a lawsuit that's still pending. 19 deaths where inquests have been ordered are still pending because of the lawsuit. And those deaths include Tommy Lay, Isaiah Obet, Damaris Butts, Eugene Nelson, and Charlene Wiles. The charter amendment won't resolve all the issues, but it will help. So vote yes in November, or October for that matter. We're voting early, right?
Absolutely. So Charter Amendment 1, the inquest amendment that we just looked at, applies to all policing that happens within King County. But the next 3 amendments that we're going to talk about are specifically impacting the King County Sheriff's Office. So we want to take just a moment to kind of anchor us in who the sheriff is directly policing. So unincorporated King County and several contract cities and agencies are the folks in our area that are directly policed by the sheriff. The other cities in King County have their own police departments. So if you look at population, 75% of the population of King County has their own police departments in their particular cities. The unincorporated population is about 11%, and the cities that contract total up to about 14%. So 25% of King County folks are the ones that are directly policed by the sheriff. And if you want to look at the details of which cities and agencies, those are listed here to the right. We wanted to kind of name that because it's an interesting thing to be voting as an entire for things that are really significantly impacting only 25% of the population. The first charter amendment that is dealing with the sheriff's office is part of the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, which we call OLEO, O-L-E-O. And it's to give them subpoena authority. Currently, the sheriff's office can refuse to share information with the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, who's our King County civilian oversight body. This body conducts audits, reviews, and investigations and policy work. They're informed by community engagement and stakeholder partnerships and represent the interests of the public in its efforts to hold the King County Sheriff's Office accountable for providing fair and just police services. So what this amendment does is it gives OLEO the authority to legally require or subpoena the sheriff's office to share documents, witnesses, and other evidence when they're investigating police conduct. Why we need it is because you have to be able to access information to be able to provide effective oversight. And subpoena power is an essential and standard oversight tool to ensure that police can be held accountable for their actions. So we recommend that you vote yes in October. I'm going to take Bailey's adjustment to that.
Okay, so Charter Amendment number 5 will make the King County Sheriff an appointed position. In 1996, the county sheriff became an elected position. It's gone back and forth between appointed and elected over time. The election of this position is inconsistent with the other department heads in King County government who are appointed. What this does is this amendment makes the King County Sheriff an appointed position again. And we believe, while it may seem counterintuitive, that making the sheriff an appointed position is actually more democratic than having them elected based on representation. And what we shared in the pie chart a few minutes ago, that the sheriff's office provides direct policing to unincorporated areas and contract cities and agencies, which make up only 25% of King County voters. So appointment gives those who are most impacted by the sheriff a greater voice through their elected council members and the executive, because 7 of the 9 council members have constituents in areas that are actually policed by the sheriff. Appointment of the sheriff also opens up the applicant pool to qualified people outside of King County. Currently, candidates for sheriff have to live and vote in King County. And since the position has become elected, the only people who have chosen to run have been from within the sheriff's office. So if we want meaningful change, it will help to be able to recruit people from outside the department or the county or even outside the state. This also opens up the position to people who are qualified but would not choose to go through a campaign. In my personal experience encouraging people to run for office, I find about 2/3 who are definitely qualified, but simply unwilling to go through the gauntlet of a campaign. So also elections can tend to politicize the position and can cause internal strife when they're contested. And an appointed sheriff is easier to hold accountable between elections. So rather than having to hold a recall election or wait until the next election, which could be years away, if there are issues with the sheriff, the council and executive can make more timely changes to respond. So our advice is to vote yes on amendment number 5 as soon as you get your ballot.
So charter amendment number 6 ties in really closely with number 5, has to do with structure and duties of the Department of Public Safety. This is the only amendment that didn't come through the Charter Commission, but it still went through all of the meetings for it. Currently, King County charter language blocks the council from being able to make any changes to how policing services are delivered to King County. And it also has the sheriff negotiating with their own guild on behalf of public safety. What this amendment does, it allows the King County Council to modify the duties of the King County Sheriff's Office or merge it with another county department if appropriate. What that means is that we can create a more diverse toolkit of public safety response options so that we can have like mental health support teams respond to people experiencing a mental health crisis. We can have rapid response social workers respond to people in need. We can have mentors, violence interrupters responding to our youth. And we can have unarmed code enforcement professionals respond to like noise complaints and traffic infractions. The other thing that this amendment does is it calls for the King County Executive to negotiate contractors with the Officers Guild instead of the sheriff. Because currently the executive is responsible only for negotiations of the fiscal items, and the sheriff is responsible for negotiating everything else like the workplace conditions. That also includes things like the civilian oversight rules and use of force standards, which are considered the workplace conditions and they're subject to collective bargaining. So currently we have a situation where the police union negotiates with the police officer, that's the sheriff, for civilian oversight provisions and use of force standards. So why we need this amendment? It prevents the conflict of interest created by the sheriff negotiating with their own union. And it also ties the duties of the sheriff to county ordinance that the council can modify in response to public demands for police reform. So if we want to reimagine how we deliver police services in order to better deliver justice to ensure everyone in our community feels safe, we might want to have some of the duties performed by people other than armed commissioned sheriff's deputies. And we may want to consider making changes about that so that our human service agencies can take on some of those responsibilities instead of armed officers. So this amendment will remove the current language in the charter that's blocking these changes that so many people are asking for. So your action is to vote yes very shortly, like in like a week, right? Less than a week. It's so soon. Okay. So besides just voting yes on these 4 amendments, another thing you can do is share about them because they are not commonly talked about or understood, and some of them are a little bit counterintuitive. So we've teamed up with the League of Women Voters, and we're having a town hall on Zoom this Thursday at 7 p.m. We're going to have 3 of our King County Council members there from District 1, 2, and 4, and both Dembowski and Zahilay are some of the sponsors of these amendments as well. We're also going to have at this town hall Sonia Joseph, who is actually, she's the mother of Jeanne Joseph McDade, who was killed by a police officer in 2017. And she went through the inquest process without having representation and has been a really instrumental person behind amendment number 1. So she's going to be a really important person to be able to hear from directly. So yeah, this is, so you can register and invite your King County neighbors, and we can throw the Zoom link up in the chat as well.
Yeah, I think the People Power map event has been shared in chat, and we'll also share that out afterwards. So I think we have a couple minutes available for questions about these charter amendments. I think I saw one in chat that was asking about who would be doing the appointing of the sheriff. So would one of you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that would be the King County Executive with approval or confirmation from the King County Council. So it would be elected people that we've chosen selecting.
Okay, and wasn't there some kind of community stakeholder part of the process as well?
Yeah, they're going to have some community stakeholders involved in that process. And one of the pieces that I've just personally found is that in this King County group, as we've been getting a hold of people, I think everyone has had the experience of our council members being tremendously accessible. And so since that unincorporated 11% and the 14% of if you live in a charter city or you're just dealing with some of those agencies, it's just so much more accessible to be able to advocate for the changes that you want through council members instead of just one person in the sheriff's office.
Cool. Anybody else have a question about charter amendments? Now's your chance. This team is the expert on charter amendments at this point.
I have a question about the amendment pertaining to inquests. It was mentioned on the slide that public defenders would be made available to the family or to the family. Was that just what I worry about is I guess we don't have enough public defenders to defend people who need legal defense in criminal cases. And so I was wondering if it's actually like a public defender. I was worried that this charter amendment might lead to, more work for an already overly taxed public defense system. I don't know. Is that a concern, or am I just?
Well, when they address, I don't think it is, because when they addressed the possible fiscal impact, they said the benefits outweighed the cost. And I'm not aware of there being too few public defenders, although I'm a former public defender. I'll accept that. 8 years with the Defender Association back in the day. But we were always fighting for lower caseloads, of course, but I believe that they're ready to gear up for that and handle it. So I don't think it'll be a big problem, given the county's commitment to do this right, basically, for the families.
I'm also not sure if it actually provides an additional public defender because there's already a public defender in the process. It's allowing them to advise the family. So
The same person who's advising the law enforcement would be advising the family as well?
No. It's a separate attorney.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a separate office as well, because otherwise you have a conflict of interest and you can't do that. Yeah.
Okay, and then one more in the chat. Do any of the amendments have words about how the funding happens for the operations therein? I don't know, is that fiscal statement or?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, even if they pass, if it's, where the funding, that's my question. Is it the same as a police in general gets some and it needs to be dictated by the council or the county council or whatever?
Are you referring to the inquest amendment or?
Sure, because any or all, none of them, because that seems like something my parents would ask, I guess, is maybe why it's a question.
We'll be voting on the budget pretty shortly. I don't know what their timeline is this year, but they normally have a budget passed before Thanksgiving, and they're working on it now, I know. So yeah, they'll be the ones deciding, and some of the costs are already being borne, like trying to operate the inquest is already borne by my old department. When I wasn't a public defender, I was a county bureaucrat, and the department I used to belong to is currently handling that, so it's already incorporated. I don't know that this has significant fiscal impact, but I know that the changes, because they're incremental, and putting in place things that are already kind of there already. So yeah, it'll be up to the county council during the budget process.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but the portions that are talking about being able to change the duties of the sheriff's office, that would allow where funding would have the potential to go. And so if we're thinking about how we can get funding shifted away from policing towards other support services, that amendment is necessary to be able to even begin to change things.
That's how I read it too, Kate.
Yeah, I think my impression is these amendments, they don't actually structurally change anything yet. They just set the conditions up such that we could change things. So, I think all the details about what happens or how it gets paid for or whatnot won't be part of what happens coming out of these amendments, but things that the county council could do because of the amendments, then they would then sort that all out later. And, that would all go through public hearings and all of that to get people's input.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to explain it, Shannon.